Hey guys, and welcome back to another Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. My name is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark of the Mic, and with midterm elections just a few days away, I thought it would be fun to have Peter Stevenson, who is running for Burlingame City Council, representing District 5, as my guest today. Peter, thank you for being a guest today.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to see you. I'm very excited and honored to be running for City Council and representing District 5, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join you on your podcast today.
That's great. I think it gives you a chance to talk to people and let people tune in later on and find out what's going on. So, Peter, as they say, the water's warm, so we're just going to jump right in, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Your website states that you have priorities for District 5, but before we go over those priorities, I want you to explain to our listeners the what and why of redistricting and how that impacts voting, because I'm sure there are plenty of citizens out there that have no idea what redistricting is.
It's a great question, and this move to district voting for Burlingame is new this election cycle. What it means is for Burlingame, there's now 5 voting districts in the city, and each district has granted a seat on the council, and any candidate running for a given district seat must live in that district. That's number one. And 2, the voters are only eligible to vote for candidates running in their district. So many people might see on their ballot, hey, how come these other folks that I'm all aware of aren't on my ballot? Well, it may be because they're from a district that those candidates do not live in, or those current council members don't live in.
So can you tell us where the boundaries for, District 5 are, the geographic kind of location?
Yeah, I might upset some folks from a map preciseness standpoint, but if you think about Burlingame kind of north-south, District 5 boundaries on the north end is Broadway Avenue, and on the south end it is Peninsula Avenue. And then to the west is California, and to the east is the Bay. So it's essentially that kind of lengthy but aspect of the community from basically California Avenue out to the Bay, and then capped north and south by Broadway Avenue on the north and Peninsula Avenue on the south.
That's interesting, because it's much more than just saying Lion Hogue or Burlingame Gables, et cetera, et cetera. It encompasses quite a few of these little communities or neighborhoods, I guess.
Absolutely. So I've been a resident of Lion Hogue for 30 years, but obviously very familiar with Burlingame Gables, Oak Grove Manor, even further to the north. Obviously Rollins Road is a major north-south corridor, and obviously all the apartments and more high-density rental and leasing areas are part of that District 5.
So you've been pounding pavement, hanging door things, goodies and stuff like that, and getting your people out to get the word out, putting your signs in the lawns and all that stuff.
Absolutely. I've done 3 town halls. We've had that in different parts of this District 5, hosted by some very close friends that have been gracious enough to open their homes and have people from the various locations in District 5 come in and join for an open conversation about some of the challenges and issues. Also done 4 precinct walks over the course of the last 6 weeks. To all parts of the district, and was fortunate enough to be joined by several folks who support my candidacy. And then obviously I have a growing list of supporters that I keep up to date through email and website communications. So yeah, it's been a great experience, frankly, in terms of not only cementing my own connection to District 5, but also more importantly is hearing the voice of the residents. What are issues that are important to them? What is top of mind? What is their view on where Burlingame is headed and what they would like to see done? So it's been very educational.
I bet. So besides seeing Peter Stevenson's signs around town, or in our district anyway, there's lots of the Proposition or Measure X signs out there. What is Measure X? Can you tell us what Measure X is?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. First and foremost, any business in Burlingame has to register with Burlingame and pays a fee. And the current Burlingame licensing program charges all businesses registered in Burlingame with the exact same rate, regardless of how big or small they are. And it's been this way for close to 30 years. So what Measure X is basically a proposal to reform the business licensing program so that it is frankly more fair to all the locally owned businesses. It's essentially a tiered rate structure. So those that are, smaller businesses are going to pay less or lower amounts, and those that are larger businesses, like we're all familiar with what's on the Bay side with some of those large entities, will pay a higher. So it's meant to be tiered so that it's more fair. The nice thing is it does not increase taxes for any residents. It is basically just a restructuring of that licensing fee as part of business licensing. And the proceeds all stay local. So when you think about needs of the city, whether it's infrastructure like sewers and that type of thing, or safety areas like sidewalks and stuff, all those funds will stay local and go into that into those types of expenditures.
Great. So if I'm hearing you right, it's not going to state government. It's going to stay right here.
Correct.
In the city.
And it does not increase property taxes
That's
or
great.
anything for any residents.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Why don't we go ahead and talk about your priorities for District 5? And I have them listed here.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read them from my notes. One of them is clean and safe neighborhoods. Personally, I think they're pretty clean and safe right now. However, with the city growing, how are we going to balance that growth and maintain the city's safety, cleanliness, and charm?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mark. I too agree that the neighborhoods are generally clean and safe, particularly when you compare them to other communities on the peninsula or in the Bay Area. But the population is growing and is expected to continue to grow. So I think it's going to be important to stay focused on this aspect of protecting what's really important to Burlingame, just not only from a safety standpoint, but also some of the charm. I do know that, when you look at things like crime statistics, which are available on the city's website, that by and large, we have a fairly low crime rate. There's certainly petty crime, but when you think about more serious crimes, we don't have a high amount. However, there is the challenge that we're all part of the same community. And, police look at what are the incident rates of different types of crimes going on or different safety issues. So if we don't report those, maybe you had a catalytic converter stolen from your car, or maybe somebody broke in a window or something. If you don't report that, then the city doesn't have a mechanism necessarily to track it. And I think it's important to understand that because police is a function of patterns and behaviors and how those police patrols are stationed, where they're allocated. I know that the police department looks at those closely to make those types of decisions. So I think that's important for residents to, regardless of how small, don't hesitate to contact the police and let them know that something occurred.
Sure, it's important to report it. That way they get a feel where things may be happening.
Correct.
Some areas more than others.
Right.
Okay. Next up would be a rational approach to traffic. So my question to you is basically, does that mean more speed bumps, traffic circles, and stop signs?
I've heard that question a bit. And, one of the things I will say on my key takeaways from the precinct walks and the different town hall events that I've done over the last 2 months is that traffic and safety is a big concern. And I'm not saying it's not a concern for Burlingame overall, but at least the viewpoint from a District 5 standpoint, it is a big concern. And so, when I think about Lion Hogue in particular and some of the traffic calming measures, I do think that's helped. It's helped calm speeding and other issues on some of the roads, but it's early. And these programs just went in more recently. And so I think we need to continue to study them, continue to assess how effective they're being, and then plan for any type of upgrades or extensions. But I also need to think about District 5 overall, not just Lion Hogue, where my house is, but what are those same kinds of issues across the district and frankly across Burlingame? Because even though I'm representing District 5, I also wear the same hat for Burlingame overall. So I do think we need to think about some of these efforts to calm traffic, which may be speed bumps, maybe traffic circles, maybe other factors. But there's also broader things, like we tend to look at safety from a car or car-centric perspective and controlling speed and things like that. But I think we need to be open to maybe some more creative solutions long-term. Things like maybe some roads should be closed off from vehicle traffic and made more dedicated to pedestrians and bicycles, rather than a shared mentality which goes on today. I also think that we need to look at bike lanes and how effective they are, making sure that we have adequate north-south and east-west transportation. One of the great things about Burlingame is the ability to walk to a lot of places if you happen to live at least close to El Camino or California or certainly in District 5. And so, I would love to see things that encourage more of that pedestrian and bicycle transportation options, but only when it comes with the right mindset about safety overall.
Yeah, the city did a great job with Carolyn Avenue from Oak Grove to Broadway, I guess that is. And then Howard Avenue has a really nice bike lane as well. And even Bayswater, I believe, has a bike lane. So I think they've done a really good step forward in that.
Yeah, I think it's a great start, and the more long-term that we can think about creative solutions that could be embraced, I think the better. And I think the community will get behind it and support it. I will point out, though, there are some avenues that, despite the bike lanes, despite some of the traffic calming attributes, is that speeding is still an issue. Yeah. And when I think about our district in particular, we have two major projects going on the north and the south end. The north side is the grade separation for Broadway, and on the south end is the San Mateo City initiative for a southbound off-ramp and interchange improvement for Peninsula Avenue. And obviously, anybody that lives close to Peninsula Avenue is very sensitive to, well, what does that mean for us here in Burlingame? If there's going to be more traffic, more people getting off southbound 101, potentially heading into the neighborhoods, how do we understand that better, and what can we do to be involved to help influence the outcomes of those projects, knowing that, for example, Peninsula Avenue is a wholly supported project and controlled jurisdictionally by San Mateo. So all the more reason to get involved, to build those relationships, to bring the perspective of Burlingame to those projects so that the right decisions and the right outcomes can be better projected.
Okay, thank you. What about affordable housing? Can you explain to us in maybe dollars and cents what affordable housing in Burlingame is? For example, let's just take an arbitrary number. An average home in Burlingame costs $2 million. Okay? What does that mean? I know what that means, but what does that mean for affordable housing?
So affordable housing conceptually is defined by the federal government. And it is effectively any housing is considered affordable when it consumes no more than 30% of a household's income. And so there's a formula, and that formula gets adjusted based on where you live and average home prices and what the cost of living things are. I'm not an expert on it. I have to absolutely get more immersed into it because it's important. But as a backdrop to affordability, couple things. One is the housing growth, and there is a housing shortage in the state of California that's been well documented. And that's led to legislature like SB 9 and SB 10 that are driving these mandates for housing elements. Essentially, having cities have to develop general plans for housing growth based on 8-year cycle projections. And those housing, are basically in the form of, granting permits to do new housing development, high density housing, adding ADUs or JADUs to your existing, single family environment, all goes towards meeting those targets that are being mandated by the state. So when you take that as a backdrop, you take the affordability issue, that results into some specific aspects of what does affordability mean for Burlingame and broadly across county levels as well. The way I look at it is, I think a healthy community is a diverse community, both in terms of all aspects of humanity and inclusive of socioeconomic elements. It does no good if you have public schools that are rated very high and you want to attract really talented teachers to teach in those schools, but they can't afford to live close to that community. Or you do the same thing with city workers or, the police and fire, other service workers that serve our commercial districts. So I think long way around to saying, we need to think about affordability broadly. We need to obviously have to achieve the targets that are being mandated to us. But specific dollars and cents, it varies on whether or not there are the number of people living in a household. So I don't want to be too specific about, it means X dollars for Burlingame without really kind of taking people through the detail.
Okay, just a couple more questions on that. Mm-hmm. Is there more than one affordable housing site being built right now? The one on Park Avenue across the street from St. Catherine's School is being developed. So I think it's almost completed, or it's getting close to being completed.
Well, certainly it's been dug, and they're working on the infrastructure below grade. There are units in that plan for residential that do achieve some of that affordability targets that are being mandated. As is recent developments in District 5, like Anson, as well as the new apartment structure just north of Anson, kind of next to the North Park Apartments. Yes. Right. And then there's also zoning now that has been targeted for North Rollins, which is not District 5, but part of Burlingame. So this affordability affects all aspects of planned growth for Burlingame. And there's a lot in the general plan that touches that, and I would encourage people to go and read that for themselves.
Okay. We'll come back to that in another show, okay? And devote that time anyway.
I would love to.
But thank you. What about a partnership with schools? What does that mean? What's your vision?
First and foremost, education in our schools are a foundation element of our community and the success of our community. I firmly believe that. When I first moved to Burlingame 30 years ago, as my kids were getting older and becoming school age, I got involved in the schools. In the case of my family, the Burlingame School District, and then ultimately San Mateo Unified School District with BHS. I was a dad's club president. I, did things related to Title I in Washington Elementary. I was BIS PTA president for a year, and I was on the board and president of BCE for a number of years. Schools are at the center of my heart and what I, believe in, but I don't want that to be interpreted as solely private solely public. I also think all schools, both public and private, are important to the success of a community. Now, back to your question about, so what can the partnership from a city standpoint? There's clear lines of jurisdiction control, funding control that separates the schools from the city. That's a given. I knew that from the very early days of my work with BCE. But I still think because of that foundational element that schools represent for a community, it's incumbent on the city council and the city at large to be as supportive as possible. Some of that is financial in the sense of partnerships for paying for, school crossing guards and things like that. That's certainly the presence of police and security and things that can be promoted there as well. But it also comes down to access to, shared community recreational space, and whether or not, there is reciprocity between the city and the school districts on supporting the community at large and for that type of access. So I think there are things that the city has been doing lately, such as meeting with the school district with a joint council kind of discussion periodically. And I think that's great. And I think the relationship currently between the city and the schools, particularly the public schools, is positive and has improved over the years. I just want to see that continue. And I think, I'll always be open to exploring ways that can enhance the success of the schools, the feeling that the schools have the support of the city behind them, and making sure that the community, kind of recognizes the importance of those schools and their performance.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly blessed in Burlingame to have, 6 elementary schools, is that correct?
6 elementary schools,
BIS,
a middle school,
the middle school, and 2
then,
high schools.
And then the high school. So, yeah, it's, I grew up as a public school kid myself. So obviously, I have a lot of connections with public school education. But I don't want to underestimate and underemphasize the importance of schools overall. The education of our kids, they're the next generation. They're the ones that are going to be the stewards in the future. And that starts with education. And my wife is a public school teacher and has been for more than 11 years. And so, it's near and dear to my heart.
Great. Well, thank you. Okay, next on my list here is support for our business community. And, I was with Molly Stone's for 22 years here in this city. And
frequent shopper, by the way.
Absolutely. And I thought we got great support from the business, from the city itself. So my question is, how can the city support its local businesses to ensure a nice variety of shops and services?
Yeah, I much like schools are a foundational element, so is a city's commercial and business community. I firmly believe that, and I support the diversity of stores in the sense that as consumers, as people who live in this community, we obviously need that breadth of services to give us options. But I think the city also plays a role in helping those businesses that are part of our community succeed, so that they can be competitive and they can make sure that they're offering those services to the community at large. And so, I look at, just the change that I've seen in 30 years with Burlingame Avenue, with some of the efforts on Broadway, and just how vital those are. So I definitely support businesses, and obviously it's not a simple equation because you have landlords, you have the independence of an economy and companies wanting to serve this community and hoping to be able to compete effectively and survive economically that way. So I look at for example during COVID, the response of the city to help businesses on both Burlingame and Broadway survive. With the opening up of the parklets and the ability to set up operations, maybe on the sidewalks and things like that. I'd love to see more of that. And, I think I think the city's evolution has made Burlingame not only something that serves the local community, but in many respects has become a destination for some of that same experience from a broader group across the bay. So I definitely pledge to work tightly with the business owner entities as well as the landlord community to make sure that we have as best we can from a city perspective. I mean, I think, businesses, as anybody would probably agree to, need to stand on their own and survive. But I think we can help with the ecosystem around that to make it suitable.
Okay. Do you get over to Broadway very much?
I do. It's a different experience for me on Broadway than, say, Burlingame Avenue. There are some things that I go to Broadway for because I really love that specific kind of charm, and some of the obviously the stores. I shopped a lot at Earthbeam. No offense from Molly's, but that was a complimentary store that I used to go to. So I was upset, or sad that it left. But I like the variety of stores on Broadway and some of the things that I go there for, whether it's Il Piccolo for coffee, whether it's Preston's in the for things. So it just I like that. I think it's a good diversity. I want obviously the folks that live closest to Broadway and obviously the business owners and landlords, we should listen to their view of where they'd like to see things go. I'm not an advocate necessarily to make it into another Burlingame Avenue, for example, but I do think that there are things that we can help make the ecosystem around that be better for consumers, better for the residents.
So some
like safety,
some beautification,
some safety. I know that the angled parking is a challenge because of safety for pedestrians, safety for cars. There's obviously the whole Broadway interchange and the volume of cars that come across that. So, traffic and safety, to me, not just as a District 5 concern, it is a Broadway as well.
So we're going to stay on the business community for a moment because I have one more little thing here. I read in the Daily Journal, I don't know, maybe last week, that there's going to be quite a construction project going on at the Broadway train station. And it's probably going to eliminate Maverick Jacks restaurant. So does city support mean that the city will help the owner of the restaurant relocate his business, or is he on his own?
Well, obviously the grade separation is something that's being driven by a lot of jurisdictions, and obviously we're the recipients in some respects of some of that change, and obviously we have a role to play in influencing it. But it's Caltrans. It's Caltrans in one aspect coming off the freeway, and obviously Caltrain and the Joint Powers Board. The city's role in helping businesses. I don't know if it's practical to be like a financing element for a private business that happened to pick a location that 10 years ago maybe wasn't foreseen to be a target for grade separation. That being said, I would certainly look into how the city could potentially help encourage the relocation of that business if that's indeed impacted. But I think it's tough to ask residents, cross that line into actually figuring out how to financially support somebody with a relocation. I think there are means to help with the relocation, but I don't know if I would cross into the financial support.
Okay. I'll end with a good answer. That was a good answer. Okay. So next up is access for seniors and disabled. What do you mean by access? What does that mean?
Well, I look at it through the lens of the fact that we're an aging demographic in Burlingame. 10 years ago, we were less than 20% with age group 60 and older. Now we're at 30% or close to it. So, and that's not just Burlingame. I mean, that's, in many respects, California and maybe even more broadly. But with that as a backdrop, I think it's so vital to make sure that accessibility, the ability for seniors to participate in the community, whether it's recreational, whether it's transportation related, whether it's access from an disability or ADA standpoint. So I'm a strong proponent of that. That's one of the reasons why I think about, for example, if I could take a commercial district like Burlingame Avenue and make it not only safer by maybe eliminating cars for part of the week or even potentially long-term all the time, that senior citizens who may be mobility challenged still need to be able to get from a access point, like at one end of Burlingame Avenue, to a business that they want to shop at. And so what are some of the creative things that the city can do around that? I've traveled a fair bit in my professional career, and I'm in a lot of different airports. And airports seem to have it figured out in the sense of being able to provide that same level of mobility and access through, golf cart sized transports or, support from folks to help people who may be in a wheelchair or need wheelchair access and things like that. So I think in general, we just have to have it on the consciousness of the city council that we need an age-friendly community. And it's no more important than, the safety of the streets, but also the mobility of transportation support for those who may be, challenged, not necessarily able to drive a car or vehicle, for example.
Thank you. I've got a little follow-up question on that now. I've heard that, we have the town square that's being built, and I'm hearing that there's going to be no restrooms at the town square. And Peter, I'm at an age now where I have to go once in a while, probably more than once in a while. So what am I going to do?
I'm right there with you.
So what are we supposed to do? Run over to Pete's every 10 minutes or something and invade them? I just,
Yeah.
Is it too late or what?
It's a good question. I've actually started to look into that, in part because I want to know what, I look at that center and particularly the parking lot owned by the city that'll be part of that development in the shared space that it represents, not only to support more community events, outdoor concerts and things like that. But and you could see that same kind of phenomena going in other cities around the peninsula, like Redwood City and stuff. So I would love to do that. But obviously with that and access and mobility, particularly for an age, the demographically older population, what are we doing about that kind of access? Now, I know historically it's been on everybody's on their own, and then they have to be somewhat close to some establishment that's going to be generous with the use of their of their restroom facility. Now, I know the plans for 220 Park include grade level retail outlets, which are mandated obviously to have restrooms in them and things, but that's just more of the same. So to your question about whether or not it's too late, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I will definitely look into it because I do think, we need to think about that shared space.
I think so.
More broadly.
Yeah.
The community center, for example, which I'm part of the Parks and Rec Foundation board. I was intimate with helping to raise funds to support the opening and some of the facilities of that. That's a shared space, and there are publicly accessible restrooms. We need to think as a city in that same lens for the downtown district, for things that are owned by the city as opposed to private ownership, wherever possible.
I hope so. Thank you. Finally here, the fiscal responsibility. Let's see, what's my notes here? The hotel tax took a big hit, and that is a big revenue generator for the city. How can the city keep its finances strong while ensuring there are no cuts to city services?
Well, I will applaud the current city council for how they've navigated the the tough waters from a fiscal standpoint for the city over these past 3 years with COVID. There was close to, rough magnitude numbers here. There was close to a $22 million level decline in hotel revenue tax for the city. So on an operating budget in the mid-80s, it dropped down to right around 60 million, if my recollection is correct. That's a big hit. It's a big hit. And, you think about all the things that the city has to support, maintenance of sewers and transportation and roads and things like that, the different departments that are involved. The good news is we were able to weather that storm and be creative from a financing standpoint to the point where we didn't lose staff. We didn't have to make cuts in services. And that's good. So I definitely want to applaud the city council for that. But as it relates to going forward, obviously with such a significant drop in the hotel tax revenue, I think the answer to your question is really we have to think about it in multiple initiatives. It can't be just solely based on the hotel returning to some level of pre-COVID volume, although we all hope that will happen, and we should work with the hotel community to see what the city might be able to do to promote or what. But that's a broader economic mechanism that's going on in terms of, the Bay Area, the people coming here for tourism or for business meetings and things like that. And, one of the biggest conferences or business meetings in the world has historically been Salesforce's thing. The most recent one, which was one of the first in the last 3 years, was only 25% of the volume of what it was pre-COVID. So that's going to take some time. So the other things that we should, be thankful for and look to is one, Measure X. Okay, Measure X will increase some revenues for the city. Two is Topgolf. Topgolf was recently approved by the district. I know there were some delays in part because of negotiations and COVID and things like that. But that's an important potential, important revenue source. And it's, it's not a short-term solution. It is actually with some specifics around the term and also elements that help protect that revenue stream for the city, but at the same time continue to support Topgolf to operate a viable business. And then I think, as I mentioned, just looking at it from a hotel standpoint, what can we do to help facilitate, some level of return? That's happening naturally as business transportation goes up, as vacations and other things that people are taking. But I would look into that, because, it's tough to make up that magnitude of tax revenue loss as a result.
What about, and I'm not sure I might have phrased this correctly, but what about the marijuana, not dispensary, but the people that, the order online, I guess?
Yeah, so
and there's going to be a tax on that?
Yes, and it is one of the provisions outside that is separated from Measure X, I guess is the right term, in the sense that it will have its own business license fee, and some of that obviously is mandated by city code, but also state level entity elements. And we have a limit to 4 dispensary, delivery elements. I think there's 1 in production, there's 1 on the books, but I'd have to double check with the city council where they are on those different license grants to those entities. But there's no storefront, and we prohibit that kind of walk-in storefront element. This is specifically delivery only.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see a storefront for quite a while, to be very honest, in San Mateo County for quite a while, to be honest with you. So, okay, that's great. Thank you for all of those points. Burlingame has population of about, I'm going to just say 30,000 residents, give or take, right? Okay,
Yeah.
more
At
or
least
less.
When I was a young kid driving up
Yeah,
the
the sign
freeway,
always
and the
says
sign,
30,000.
it always said like 29,600 or something.
Let's just
and
take-
I think it still does, but yeah.
It does. So we're going to take 30,000, okay? Not everybody's voting age. We know that. What's considered a good voter turnout in Burlingame? What would be, we had a good turnout?
Honestly, I've heard different perspectives on that over the course of the last 3 months when I announced my candidacy for District 5. Two factors. One is we're not in a presidential cycle right now. This is a non-presidential election cycle. It is a November election, unlike, say, a June primary or something. But in general, the numbers are lower than what you would see in a presidential cycle. We have 4,000 of the 6,000 residents roughly in District 5. I think 4,000 are age eligible to be voting. Of those 4,000, there's a subset of that is actually registered to vote, or at least participated in voting in, let's say, in the last 5 elections. So if you adjust for that number, you probably have closer to 3,000, maybe 3,200 people that are kind of at least registered in the last 5 years, not suggesting that they all voted in the last 5 years. And then you look at, okay, well, what is the number of people that actually end up voting consistently over multiple election cycles? And from my vantage point, that is probably closer to maybe 1,500 total. So if we were in a presidential cycle, maybe you see, at least half, if not more, of that voting. Since we're in a non-presidential cycle, I'm expecting a little lower. I would be really, I want everybody to vote. I think it's so important that we are a participatory democracy. And there's a lot of things we can, profess at the national level to make that better going forward in terms of, access to voting and encouraging people and the education behind it. But for Burlingame, I would certainly love to see at least 1,000 people vote in this election cycle. And that's probably a little naive in the sense that it might be.
What did you just say?
I would love to see 1,000 people vote in District 5.
Okay, in District 5.
No, I'm not talking about Burlingame overall.
But there's 5 districts, right? Is there 5?
There are 5 districts.
So if everybody got 1,000, that'd still be only 5,000 voters, huh? That doesn't seem like a lot to me.
Well, I've heard numbers. I've heard projections from people that have gone through this many times before that is lower. So that's why that's why I'm canvassing. That's why I'm out talking to people.
Yeah.
It's obviously in part to get their voice, to understand their concerns and their priorities and be able to represent them well. But it's also, it is the mechanism by which we drive the right direction for our community. And to make sure that we're, influencing how things change going forward. Change is inevitable. We could all agree to that in the sense that in the 30 years that I've been here, there's been lots of changes. The equation I look at is, well, have those changes improved life and the experience of our community, or have they detracted? And so the only way you influence things to be more likely an improvement is to stay involved. And that's obviously from a city council perspective, and why I am so committed to community service and being a participant, but it's also extends to voting. And that's the voice that we need to hear. And so I hope I'm surprised. I hope a lot of people vote. And I'm certainly encouraging people. I've even mentioned at my town halls is I don't care if you vote for me. I just encourage you to vote.
Get out and vote.
Get out and vote. It's not hard. It's important to do your research and understand what you're voting for. But whether it's a mail-in ballot, whether it's dropping something off on voting day, just vote.
So, Peter, you answered all the questions great. We touched on all the topics. I want to thank you for that. But before we wrap this up, why don't you give a little shout out to everybody about your website? How do we get to your website? And they can see your qualifications, endorsements, and maybe even contact you if they'd like to.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you, Mark. It's been really great speaking with you today. This is a lot of fun. If I'm so honored, I'd love to do it some more as we go forward. As I shared at the beginning, I'm very excited and honored to be running for Burlingame City Council. I've been dedicated to community service all my life, not just here in Burlingame, but even before. I've lived in the district for 5 years. I am passionate and care about our community, and I appreciate the support. And for those who want to either connect with me or just learn more about my background and qualifications or some of the issues that we've been talking about today on the podcast, just go to my website, which is Burlingame.com. So peterforburlingame.com is my website, and I look forward to hearing from you. And again, please go out and vote.
Peter and I urge all of you to vote next Tuesday, November 8th. Remember, every vote counts, especially in Burlingame, because it's a small town. Peter Stevenson, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Peter Stevenson for being a guest today on Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. And hey, guys, if you like what we're doing on these podcasts, please subscribe and hit the like button. I'd also like to thank Shelby and Kathy for editing and producing, and my musical director, Bray. You can hear more of Bray at bray.com. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this podcast, and no portion of this program can be copied or rebroadcast without permission. So, until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.